great to be joined here by State Senator Melissa Hurtado. How are you doing? Getting some rest after this very intense session that just wrapped up?
I'm still catching up on rest, but I'm ready to go. We're doing a lot of work in the district, and we have additional open houses as planned. And so I'm looking forward to engaging with constituents on the work that we did this year.
And before we get into to the legislation that you have, when you talk about already having these hours and still meeting people, how do you transition from what was such a hectic session into still getting back and doing your job in the district too, even though the bills won't be seen for a little bit of time?
Well, to be honest with you, Will, for us it's always on time. We're always working, whether it's morning, day, or night, weekends. I was on a phone call with a constituent at 9 o'clock at night last night. I mean, whether we're up at the Capitol or here in the district, we're always working, even on the weekends. And we try to find little moments where we can do downtime with family and loved ones. But for the most part, it's always on the go.
I think one of the things when we look at your work in particular in the state legislature, and we've talked about this before, your focus has kind of been recently is corruption in California, then also across several different industries. Can you talk about some of your legislation that kind of feeds into that? What are we looking at exactly?
Yes, so I mean, this year what I did with my legislative team, I said I wanted to focus on tackling corruption, making sure that we address price gouging situations, right? Because we know that price gouging is going on across our economy. We're feeling it in our grocery stores. We're feeling it when it comes to our rents. We're being gouged left and right. And so, to me, that's corruption. That's fraud that is happening, and we got to be able to tackle that because it's hurting everyone. It's hurting my family, and I know that it's hurting the constituents of Senate District 16 and across California. And so, I wanted to focus in on this. We had done a lot of research. We had, in 2021, I did a letter to the U.S. Department of Justice asking them to look into water rights abuses in the West because I felt we were being gouged. I feel like we're being gouged when it comes to the implementation of SGMA, and it all boils down to data, it boils down to technology, and so this gouging that is occurring out in the community and our economy, we're not seeing it as transparent as you would think of it in previous decades, right? It's a lot more it's a lot more opaque, and so we wanted to focus in on that. We have several pieces of legislation, including making sure that we increase fines and penalties and sentencing enhancement for any financial actors that were caught committing a financial crime. We focused on algorithm price fixing, because now technology is able to price fix for instead of having to meet, two businesses having to meet in a room and doing price fixing. Now it's all done through algorithms, and so we wanted to be able to tackle these issues that were just really, hurting and impacting people all over the state of California, but especially here in the Central Valley. And we made some progress, but there's still a lot of work that needs to be done.
Yeah, I was going to say, what is that next look, and what is the message and a mission going forward into the next legislative session through some of what your legislation looks like?
Well, I think that work continues. I mean, not all of this got through. The good news is that, for example, when it comes to the algorithm price fixing bill that we had, it died in the first committee that it was introduced in. The good news is that the U.S. Department of Justice is now taking on algorithm price fixing when it comes to rents, and so they have a case against Real Pages at the moment, and that's a success. So I think that once people begin to understand, because I still think there's a lot of room for understanding what that means. I think there was a lot of education that needed to occur when I presented this bill, because they're fairly new concepts for the majority of people.
Well, I was going to say, because to break it down for the folks at home too, we have inflation that's been affecting the country for some time, but then you're saying that there's a layer below that where people are then taking advantage and they're going to price gouge if they can on some of the margins. Is that fair to say?
Look, I'm going to say that I'm not an economist, but I will say that part of it is inflation. A huge part of it is just price gouging.
And the algorithms would allegedly then try to implement some sort of profit that they can get on top of having to adjust for inflation.
Yeah, so algorithms are a huge piece of this. AI also, but there's all these new ways of price gouging that I'm still learning about. And earlier this year, about 2 months ago, I was out in Washington, D.C. I wanted to make sure I had a meeting with the FTC to talk a little bit more about these issues that they're seeing occur across the country in our economy and have a better understanding about it, so that I understand how it impacts here in California. And there's another one where it's like pricing surveillance. And so there's just all these various ways of how tech is being used in business to price gouge the consumer.
And it's not just in one or two industries. We're talking about a wide range of industries here as well. This is, as you said, it can expand from rent to possibly other things here too.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I think that it's the most pressing or the most occurring in our critical infrastructure sectors. So healthcare, education, food, water, energy, and the things that people need the most. That's where it's being felt the most. And I believe that where we're seeing even the most money being invested by private equity is in the healthcare sector. But nonetheless, it's occurring across other sectors as well.
Well, I imagine the number one issue seems to be focused for you is on affordability. And of course, water and energy are there too, but water and energy kind of intersect with affordability too, and especially when it comes to high costs right now.
Absolutely. It's definitely tackling the cost, making sure that things are affordable, because if I'm feeling the pain, if my family's feeling the pain, I know the pain is out there. I've had those conversations with individuals, and that has to be part of the conversation from here moving forward in Sacramento. And it's something that I've been outspoken about quite a bit. And my electricity bill this month was $800, and I'm only home on the weekends. How does that happen? And I know that these are the same questions that the people of this region and across California are asking themselves. How is that possible? How is my bill now double the amount? I'm furious about it. I really am, because it's inhumane. It's inhumane to charge someone so much money when people are struggling, and I don't know if others recognize it, but I recognize it, and I'm angry about it, and I'm going to continue to work in this space and be vocal about it. And I know these are like concepts that are difficult to, at least for me to articulate, and they're new concepts, but I'm eager to talk about them.
Right, and one of the things we've talked about before coming into this interview was the special session that may still be happening with the state Senate. We know the state assembly is taking on, state Senate may be there too, and it's focused on oil and gas and energy production and reducing gas prices. But something you said is that you want, if there's going to be a special session, you kind of want it on affordability across the board in California right now.
Yeah, I mean, if we're going to talk about price gouging, let's talk about price gouging. I want to talk about price gouging. I want to address price gouging. And yes, if that means that price gouging in the oil industry, I'm open to, but we have to approach this in a careful, cautious manner, and it has to be transparent, and there has to be respect for the legislative process, and there's bipartisan support for that, behind that, and that's exactly what I want, and I want to talk about price gouging for sure.
And would that also involve, taking big rental companies or things like that, having them testify in the state legislature as well? Is that kind of the area where you want to go to next?
I want to be able to do that. I guess it all depends if I'm allowed to do that. But yeah, look, I chaired the Senate Ag Committee and want to be able to do those types of things. But I don't just commit to doing that, right? Because sometimes there's when one door closes, you got to be able to find other doors that are open. And so for me, I'm all options are on the table to make sure that we get the message across that price gouging needs to stop, that we need to address it. But it doesn't just mean that we're going to be specific on gas and oil. We got to be able to talk about energy, our electricity rates as well, and our food and water. All of those things. Those are things that people. I believe people want us to address. So we can't just do it in silos. We got to do more than that.
Can you also talk about a little bit of your legislation on white collar corruption, kind of looking into that a bit?
Yeah, I mean, I touched on it a little bit in terms of the penalties and sentencing enhancements, SB 697, that didn't make it through. I also had another piece of legislation dealing with lobbyists now having to report to the state if they're acting on behalf of a foreign entity. That bill didn't make its way through, but we're going to revamp those efforts, especially with what's been going on and the deputy chief of staff to the New York governor being arrested under FARA. I think it's ever more pressing. I think we got to have transparency in government, and FARA is a good, or at least the version that we had in the state. We got to be able to have transparency. We're not saying it's forbidden. It's just simply saying we want to be able to, that there's transparency. So we're bringing that bill back. We also have legislation on as I mentioned, the algorithms. We have making sure that small farmers have access to the funds that are available at the state, so that they're able to be successful. That bill's on its way to the governor. We have a transparency or financial disclosure piece of legislation, making sure that there is no loophole for individuals that are part of the like water boards, for example, that if they have a financial interest or conflict, that they need to disclose that. Again, transparency, tackling corruption. I just think that transparency in government across the board is good, and we want to be able to push more of that.
And one of the things that you mentioned there too, and you've mentioned it a little bit earlier in our conversation, was about relating to agriculture, and you mentioned farming and funding for farmers. How important is that this year? We've had this record heat wave, and I know that it's had and taken a toll on some crops that folks grow. What is your office been doing as far as receiving those messages from farmers? Because I imagine you've been hearing a lot. I mean,
yeah. Since I started office, I've been hearing a lot about it, and trying to do as much as I can, and providing as much as I can. I don't have specifics in terms of specific allocations in this year's budget for farmers, but it's an issue that's not just impacting farmers; it's also impacting farm workers. And earlier this year, in the summer, I also did a roundtable in Cuyama Valley and heard from farmers and farm workers there. The biggest thing is water. I mean, access to water, SGMA, how it's impacting them. It's farm workers having to travel, farther away for work. We've pushed in the past for money for farm workers to make sure that they, are able to survive with the ongoing climate crisis, whether it's flooding or droughts. And there was some funding that was put into the budget that the governor put out, but I don't think it does far enough what this region and the state needs.
Right, and I think on that topic too, when we think about water, we look at what the governor's doing as far as dam repairs and not going far enough, as some would suggest, as far as dam expansion for places like Shasta Dam. I know that that's a bit of a rift between the state legislature and then, of course, what representatives like David Valadao want to see happen in D.C. I mean, how do we expand water capacity in California? Is there a legislative fix for that? Well,
I know that the governor has a water plan, and I don't know all the details of his plan. But from what I know is that there's efforts to expand groundwater storage. There's efforts to built the Delta conveyance. There's just in terms of having better data to better manage water, which I'm supportive of, but it's at the same time it's like there has to be a balance, making sure that this data is not biased in any way, because again, when it goes into applying it into an algorithm, it could create shortages for some, and we don't want that. And so I'm supportive of all things that bring us energy and water security, but it cannot be at the cost of the taxpayer. Absolutely. I mean, there's got to be a balance, and I think right now there is no balance.
I know that everyone says the solution is to just expand, but of course that's an expensive cost as well. Any additional efforts made to infrastructure is going to cost an additional several $1 million, you would have to imagine.
Well, yes, but I would say that what I'm also concerned is about what we've also done to go kind of, in a way, looking backwards, right? They're making sure that we're not making a mistake by tearing down a dam, making sure that, we're hearing about this, right? That this is a thing. We're hearing about it also happened when it comes to nuclear energy, right? We were talking about shutting these nuclear plants down, and what ended up happening is that we needed this last one that was left in the state of California, and so that's kind of been my fear. It's like we want these things that we're working almost in a way backwards instead of moving forward and creating shortages for ourselves in the way that I think ultimately end up driving the cost of these main things that we need in our daily lives. So.
And as far as energy is concerned, I know that everyone here in Kern County is very supportive of oil and oil jobs that creates and continuing to grow the economy here as far as that's concerned. But there's the shift, of course, from the state capital to kind of go towards more green energy. And if it were just such an easy replacement, then you would see more green energy jobs coming here. We haven't quite seen it just yet. But is there a future where oil still plays a big part here in Kern County, or we are already beginning our transition? I
mean, personally, I think that oil is going to continue to be part of our energy security plan moving forward. I don't see it not being. I don't see how we can be energy secure without oil, but maybe I'm wrong, but we can't. I think that when I have conversations with people, I don't say we can't be, anti-solar or anti-oil or anti, green energy and we have to make sure that we're energy secure first and foremost, and we want to work towards a transition, but that transition's got to be fair for everybody, like for the workers, for the communities, and as well for the individuals, for the consumer. And I think right now it's not.
But I think some would also look at what the governor's done as far as, for example, calling this whole special session here just for the purpose of going after oil prices and trying to reduce them. And maybe it's a noble cause to reduce gas prices at the pump, but at the same time too, it might not be the most business friendly. And of course, this is where the workers are in the Central Valley. I mean, is it tough to see that or make that draw or that comparison when you're up in Sacramento to kind of see the difference between what you hear from legislators that are in some of the more populated areas in San Francisco and Los Angeles versus what I guess the reality is here in the Central Valley?
Well, here in the Central Valley and throughout the country, right? I mean, if you look at the cybersecurity breach that happened in the East Coast, and it shut gasoline down for, I think it was a couple of hours. I mean, there was panic. And so energy security is national security. And so that's what should be at the forefront of everyone's mind, right? Not about we're on this camp or that camp. It should be about energy security is a national security. And when you don't have it, there's panic, and we cannot have that.
Then the Kern County oil workers would probably argue job security as well when it comes to legislation like that too.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the technology is already creating a situation where we're just seeing more and more layoffs. I worry about that. There was a statistic out there that said that, AI was going to change the workforce and reduce it by 1/3 around the world. I mean, that's that's a scary thing to think about. And if we're moving in that direction, we got to figure out very quickly how we're going to create job opportunities in this new era that we're all experiencing. Because what I've been telling people is that I almost feel like the era that we're in right now, or the age, I should say, the age that we're in now, that we're experiencing, is very similar to the 19th century when we're going through the Gilded Age. It's like the Gilded Age and what we're experiencing now. There's a lot of similarity.
Right, and what would you imagine that your next session is going to be like as far as addressing AI? Because I imagine, how many bills do you think? I mean, is it going to be a third of the bills that you're going to see in this next session that you get are going to be addressing AI in some form or function?
I think almost probably every office will have a bill, at least one bill on AI. The question, I guess, is how many of them are going to get out? How many of them are going to get to the governor's desk? And which ones are actually going to make a difference of those that do end up making to the governor's desk? Because it is a big push and a big fight, and I'll tell you that a lot of my bills didn't get through, but helping colleagues who were able to get their bills move along the way was a tough process, and there was a lot of back and forths on why a bill was good or why it was bad.
When you look at this past session, what are a few of the biggest bills that you think, okay, this is what our voters should know about here in Kern County and the constituents here? I mean, particularly even if it's not something that you've authored, if it's something that you help support or help push through.
Yeah, look, one of the bills that I helped move through at the end of session, and it was, I helped whip the votes, and I presented it, AB, I believe it was 3129. By Assemblymember Dr. Wood. I was a co-author of it, touching on this issue of price gouging, making sure that there's oversight when it comes to transactions that end up resulting in mergers and impacting health patients. That one was, I think, one of the biggest ones that was done, and we were down to the last hour, and we were struggling to get the votes, and we ended up getting all 21, the ones that were needed on the Senate side to be able to send it back to the Assembly for concurrence. But that was a very difficult bill to move. But I personally believe that it's going to help Californians, and it's going to improve their access to care, and it's going to hopefully result in the consumer not being, or the patient not being, price gouged, and better quality care.
And when it comes to kind of this final thing I want to look at a little bit too is Governor Newsom, and what a lot of people perceive, and it's a perception from us, and perhaps it's just the fact that it's a supermajority in the House and Assembly, or excuse me, in the Assembly and in the Senate, as far as the Democratic supermajority that's there, is that there's a top-down dictate from Governor Newsom down in a lot of respects. And is that something that's fair to say? Because we've seen impacts on Kern County lawmakers when they've gone back to fight about oil, whether it's Jasmine Baines or before her, Rudy Salas, on issues related to energy and things of that nature. Is that a reality for you? Do you feel that kind of pressure from within your own party and from the governor himself?
I mean, I definitely don't feel that from my caucus. There's separation between the branches of government, and I don't feel like ever, whether it be the Assembly or the governor, putting any kind of pressure on me or putting me in a corner. I mean, I don't feel that. I do get a lot of respect from my colleagues in the Senate, and they respect the work that I do. They respect the region that I come from, and know that I'm not always going to be on the same page that they are. And so for me, it's more about how do I make sure that there is minimal to no effect on whatever policy is in front of me, rather than be straight up, I'm against this. And so that's going to be my goal in whatever is being presented moving forward, and trying to make the case for the Central Valley and for Kern County. And if ultimately it's very bad for this region, then I'm going to vote no. But my first goal is, like, I got to be realistic. Whatever policy it is, if it's harmful to the Central Valley, I got to work to make sure that that we get it to a point where it's not hurtful. And if we can't do that, then I reserve my right to vote no on it. And nobody. I mean, I haven't been punished or anything of that sort. So I think the Senate's a little bit different than the Assembly, but I definitely haven't felt that.
You haven't felt a pressure on you in the way that maybe you had other people from the Central Valley have in their time.
No, definitely not.
But there is the conscious sense that your district that you represent is more of a purple-leaning district. It's not one that's considered one way or the other politically, and you're looking at it from the perspective of what's best for the Central Valley. But there is a supermajority of Democrats that want you to vote probably one way, and that's where leadership comes from, to particularly be more partisan than the other. Is that a fair assessment?
I guess it. I mean, for me, I don't personally take that into. That's not the argument that I make. I think more than anything, as policymakers, we got to be able to do a better job at making sure that we understand each other's districts. Just like I want others to understand the district that I represent, I need to put some effort into understanding the districts that other people represent too. And what we need to do a better job at is perhaps making that how it all interconnects, right? And I think for me, I don't just represent Democrats. I represent Republicans, Independents. I represent every individual that lives within the Senate district. And when I present my policies, when I do it thinking about the issues that are impacting them the most, whether they're Democrats, Republicans, Independents. I don't ask. It doesn't matter. What matters to me is addressing the problems of the individuals that I represent, and making sure that there is that connection of what we do here in the Central Valley impacts everybody else in California. And I think that's just a top priority. And that's the case, I would say, across the country, right? Is how do we make that connection that rural America plays a huge role in the everyday lives of everyone else that's not in rural America, because we provide the food, we provide the energy, and without us, there is no America the way that we know it today. And so that's the message that we need to be communicating, because I just think that there's a real disconnect between rural and urban communities, and so we got to be able to build the bridge. And when we do that, I think we are successful.
Is that a disconnect in between, and when especially it comes to this special session, because it seems like the outlook is that you have people from these other parts of the state, particularly the more blue parts of the state, that are saying, okay, we're looking at the prices and they are really expensive, versus I think the reality here where people look at the price and say, yeah, we know that this because there's a gas tax that's on gasoline here for our gas prices. And that's really the big contributor to why gas prices in California are more expensive than the rest of the country. And of course, there's a look at the margins and seeing to reduce profits from big oil and things like that. But at the end of the day, eventually you'll get down to a point where they're not making much profits, and they'll have to start shutting down places, and that's going to be the reality. That's going to impact us here. I mean, that seems to be the disconnect in the special session. People here in the Central Valley seem to know it's due to the gas tax versus what you have, of course, or in other parts of the state where they're like, why are we so different? Oh, it's the big oil companies, right? That's the difference in rhetoric.
Well, yeah. Look, I think that I'm not going to say that the tax cannot be blamed for it, because it is part and included into the price of what we consume, and that needs to be part of the conversation, right? But there is some legitimate concerns that the governor has, right? We do. I mean, I believe in building storage for gasoline as back as 2020 at the start of the pandemic. That's one of the things that I was really concerned about, because again, it's really about having energy security. But again, it's we got to be able to have a transparent process, and a process that respects the institution, right, the legislature. And when we have that, I think we'll get to a solution that is right for Californians. But there's a lot of things that play into it, and at the end of the day, we have to be able to provide energy security for Californians. And I do believe that we got to have that conversation about storage and making sure that the refineries are not colluding and that they're shutting down at, all at this. And that's what happened, right? Like at some point they were doing maintenance at the same time, and that plays a huge role into the pricing of the gas that we use. So all of that we got to be able to consider, right? Again, energy security and making sure consumers are not being price gouged.
Right. One last point on this. The argument that they would make would be that we have to do this. We have to look at expanding our profits, because if we don't, this is a shrinking industry, and eventually we're going to go down to the margins of having minimal profits and not being able to expand our work that we have here in California. That's their argument, is that it's good for business because it'll be good for the people that they hire and expand the drilling that they'll be able to do and the production that they have.
And I would say that the data will be telling of that, if that's true or not. And so when we have the information and the data, then yeah, well, if they're right, then they're right. We'll get to that point. But if we don't have information and we're asking for information or seeking information, I mean, it's not truth until it's actually verified in the information that is provided.
And then looking ahead and looking to end on a nice high positive note, what are you looking forward to the most this next session? What does the work look like in this meantime to kind of gather that legislation? Obviously, we talked about corruption and kind of refining those and seeing what that looks like. What are some other big topics that you'll be looking to hit on in these months between now and the next time?
I mean, I think that a lot of it stems around that. Of making sure that one of the things that I would like to get out is a poll or a survey of the how our Senate district, our constituents were impacted by the heat waves. If there was any potential harms with any power surgeries during the heat wave, I just kind of want to know a little bit more about what the impact of the climate is on constituents.
It's important too, because that's the other thing that comes with oil is going to be the pollution aspect of it too, and the air quality of the Central Valley is something that's always talked about, and rightly so, as it goes to what we have to live through here, and of course what farm workers and those in the oil fields have to experience even more than what we do. So thank you so much for your time. We appreciate you coming in, and we look forward to continuing our conversations as we get into the next session.
Thank you for having me, Will. Yeah.